Is it fair to say that something I've been thinking about lately? I mean, I know when I was a kid, the classes, it was like, oh, the Nazis. We didn't learn much about the USSR. We didn't learn much about any of it. It was just Nazi. And so while we're looking for Nazis, it's the Bolsheviks that are going to come through the back door.
It's not strictly fair to call them Bolsheviks. But you are right. The hunt for Nazis has been very pathetic and has turned up very little in and of itself as well. But it's not fair to call them Bolsheviks, although they are communists. But they're a very new kind of communist. So the Bolsheviks are from the turn of the 20th century. Lenin decided that communism. It was apparent to the communists of the early 20th century, at the very turn of the sort of 1900s, that communism wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to come about on its own. The apparent flaws in capitalism, the contradictions in capitalism that Marx and Engels expected to just naturally flow into a communist society weren't going to happen. And so Lenin conceived of something that's come to be known as vanguardism. That is, when the state becomes weak, a vanguard of communist revolutionaries would be able to overthrow it and then bring about communism, and that's how we ended up with the Soviet Union. That's what Bolshevism is. So no, it's not fair to call the people at the moment who are communists Bolsheviks, because they're not active revolutionaries who are physically trying to overthrow the state and instantiate a socialist regime. Our socialists are much more like the Fabians. Are you aware of the Fabian Society?
No, I'm always hearing about the Fabian Society.
Right. Well, again, the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the communists were well aware that this wasn't working. And so there were three different strands that broke out, ideological strands that broke out of communism. The first one, well, not the first one. The first one was Fabianism, which was the British, particularly English, method that the intellectuals at the time thought of themselves as being able to achieve socialism by degrees. We will gradually work our way through the institutions. We'll gradually implement socialism little by little until finally we are in the socialist utopia. The second one, by the way, the logo of the Fabian Society, and I'm not joking about this, it is literally a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Wow.
You can look it up. I swear to God. I swear to God. Yeah. Look up the Fabian Society's logo. Weirdly, they don't have it on the Twitter bio.
Wow. That's interesting.
It's actually a wolf in sheep's clothing.
I was told that once by a 25-year-old female pedophile. She said that she was a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Well, that's literally the logo the Fabian Society chose for themselves. Wow. The second one was Lenin's vanguardism, and the third one was actually fascism. The fascists in Mussolini and Giovanni Gentili recognized that socialism was a dead doctrine, and so conceived of the next step in socialism, which was essentially a kind of national socialism, because socialism up until that point was conceived as an international socialism. Workers of the world unite. But of course that couldn't and didn't happen. And so they're not Bolsheviks. But the thing is, that didn't work either, right? The Soviet Union, by the sort of late 60s, early 70s, Western intellectuals had defended it very rigorously, except it was becoming apparent that it wasn't very different in effect to the Nazi regime. There was millions dead, tremendous tyranny, unbelievable amounts of social repression, censorship, secret police, etc., etc. The Iron Curtain was down over Europe, and everyone could see it. And so Western intellectuals by the late 60s, early 70s had backed off of defending the Soviet Union. It wasn't how socialism was going to be brought about. And so they were stuck, actually. They were kind of blue-balled, as it were. And they were in Western academia. And so you had the Frankfurt School, the Herbert Marcuse, Adorno, Horkheimer, and a few others, who were philosophically trying to find purchase by which to attack not just capitalist society, but also communist society as well. Because what they'd noticed is that the industrial society itself had managed to kind of lock in the entire civilization, so it become totalizing, and it flattened everything down into just mass consumer products. And on this regard, the capitalists and the communists were basically the same, and they're having a competition for who could produce the most abundance. And like you can look at Mao's speeches and discussions, where he's constantly comparing the steel output of China to England. It's like, no, we're going to supersede England in very productive capacity, because they are both materialist philosophies. They're both concerned with the material conditions of the people that live under them. And so it was a competition, but both on the same track. And the Frankfurt School realized, well, okay, we may well end up with abundance, but we're not going to end up with equality. We're not going to end up with the sort of liberation from structures of dominion that the ideal of communism and ultimately the ideal of liberalism promises. And so they set about constructing what Marcuse calls critical theory in order to start poking holes in liberal democracy. And this manifested or mutated through Harvard Law School into critical race theory. And in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw, one of the critical race theorists, coins the term intersectionality. And then for the next 30 years, intersectionality, known now colloquially as wokeism, was infiltrated, or that's not the right word. Infiltrated is not the right word. Promulgated, but kind of like
incepted.
Kind of. It was like the West was a very large sort of domino run, and they just had to flick the first one down, and eventually the top institutions become woke because we had a set of premises all set up. So we should do this, we should do that, we shouldn't be this, we shouldn't be that. And intersectionality kind of short-circuited this, and it just caused the whole thing to kind of collapse until they have no argument in favor of the native people, and they only have arguments in favor of minorities through the lens of anti-racism and critical race theory. But what's important to remember is these people are following the same desires and impetus as the Bolsheviks. They were just doing it through far less bloody means, you have to give them their credit, but much more in the Fabian model of things.
Interesting. That's a short history of where wokeism came from.
Yeah, the short history of the left, basically, in the 20th century, in the last 120 odd years. But it's one of failure, and they admit this themselves.